So my name is Ben Morrison, as Ron said. I'm a solutions architect here at Trilio, located in San Francisco, but covering all of North and South America. So first off, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what Trilio is. And so as I said before, we are a backup and restore solution or backup restore tool to help you to capture the data and metadata of your stateful and stateless applications running on Kubernetes clusters. So a few themes that go along with our design criteria with Trilio. First off, we are distribution agnostic. As long as you are running a cluster that is CNCF certified in terms of distribution, or excuse me, or is just a upstream Kubernetes cluster, you can run Trilio on any of those different types of clusters. Get into that deployment piece that Ron just mentioned. In terms of storage, no matter what storage you're using on your Kubernetes clusters, we are storage agnostic. So you can use any type of storage with any of your distributions or any of your clusters. The only requirement that we do have is that you have a CSI driver with snapshotting functionality. Luckily, there's a lot of documentation out there about whether your CSI driver has snapshotting or not, and almost all the major storage providers and all the major players at this point have those CSI drivers with snapshotting. So you should be good to go. If not, reach out to someone at Trilio. You can always find out. When it comes to where you store your backups to, we speak NFS or S3 compatible storage. That is that third-party location where your backups would be stored to. I'll also note that's not something that Trilio provides. We provide the tool, the solution, to complete that backup and complete that restore very seamlessly. From there, storage is on your end, and so S3 or NFS is what we're compatible with, as well as blob storage coming out early next year in one of our newer releases, one of our next releases coming out. We're also cloud agnostic. No matter where you're running your cluster, any public cloud, on-prem, even disconnected or air-gapped environments, you can run Trilio and make sure your data is protected and backed up successfully. And then lastly, we're also package management agnostic. No matter how you deploy that application, you can back it up with Trilio. And not only just backing up that application or workload, but for example, with Helm charts or operators, when you back up an application based on that Helm chart or operator, you're also backing up all of the resources associated with that Helm chart or operator to make sure that the application is running exactly as it was when it was backed up in whatever point in time in that new cluster. Aside from Helm chart and operators, you can also just simply select the label in your Kubernetes cluster to kick off a backup, or you can also select the entire namespace. So the major themes, here are the agnostic piece. No matter your environment, you're probably going to be able to run Trilio, to be honest. And also on top of that, granularity. You can get very granular on how you do your backups and restores. So now that we have a bit of a summary on TrilioVault for Kubernetes and what it is and what we do, let's dive into ransomware and talking about how ransomware fits into this whole picture. So as I'm sure has already been mentioned, maybe already today, but the definition of ransomware is an attack. Ransomware attacks are a type of cyber attack where malicious actors and organizations use software to gain unauthorized access to data, encrypt it, and then hold it for ransom. We all probably on this call know that definition by now. We've heard it, different ransomware stories many times in the past couple years. And so with this growing presence of ransomware, this is something that Trilio wanted to address when it comes to that backup and recovery end. So a little more on the statistics itself, though, of ransomware, especially when it pertains to the past couple years. It's estimated right now that there are 300 million cases of ransomware attacks happening each and every year. There's no guarantee that the attackers will actually unlock your data and that you'll actually get your data back. So it's very likely to have permanent loss of data if, unfortunately, one of these ransomware attacks do occur. The average cost of a single ransomware attack year to year has increased by 171%. It's now over $300K for the average cost of one ransomware attack. And attacks have increased during the pandemic. They've actually increased 72%, very much so because of everyone working from home and working a lot more remotely. Because of this, also access to business data has become a lot more vulnerable. There's a lot more business and exposure happening over mobile devices because of the pandemic as well, and so that's increased vulnerabilities by up to 50%. So with all of these statistics and talks about ransomware, Trilio wanted to make sure we were aligning our design criteria of backup and restore to fit with the needs of best practices against ransomware, essentially. So where does Trilio fit into all of this? You might be thinking to yourself at this point, Trilio is not a cybersecurity solution. Why would they be stepping into the ransomware space? Well, an important component of ransomware is having that backup plan, that plan B, and making sure that you're protected in everywhere that your data is stored. So essentially, when it comes down to a ransomware attack, there's two different points of entry that one of these malicious actors could go about to get access to a data and encrypt it. The first thing they're going to do is obviously go directly into that Kubernetes management console or that primary storage sitting on that cluster itself and try to encrypt data that way. Now, if they're successful, then most people doing this know and are aware that it's very likely that you have some sort of backup as well. And so the next step would be to attack that S3 or NFS storage where some backups might be stored so that you can't restore that data in the event of your primary storage being encrypted. So this is the component that these actors will go about in terms of that ransomware attack. And so the primary storage, the cluster itself, the data sitting on your cluster and in your databases is mostly pretty much outside of the realm of Trilio. What we're focused on is restoring that data in the event of it getting encrypted. And so what we focus on is then also protecting your backups themselves that you've taken through Trilio, and those backups being stored on that S3 or NFS. So that management console backup storage media on the right side there, that is where Trilio is focusing in terms of protecting your backups themselves. So our approach then to go about protecting this NFS and S3, those backups themselves, is to follow the NIST cybersecurity framework as well as the NCCOE framework. These are both internationally recognized organizations that essentially go about communicating and researching the best practices for combating ransomware. And so in this theme, of course, ransomware is not going to be just a single software or a single feature. It's going to be an entire strategy. And so at Trilio, we wanted to provide a comprehensive approach to ransomware protection and recoverability. We're not the whole picture, but we're a very essential part of the picture, essentially, when it comes to that backup and restore. And so, like I said, we followed that NIST cybersecurity framework and NCCOE best practices. And so the main components that we found of these frameworks were identify and protect, detect and mitigate, and finally recover. Identify and protect, of course, talking more about that preventative approach, making sure that any data is secure, encrypted properly, and then that detect and mitigate being if an attack does occur, if an attempt of a ransomware attack does occur, having some way to have awareness of that and alert users of that attack that might be happening. And then lastly, of course, really where Trilio comes in and where backup and recovery is most essential is, of course, that recovery piece. You have to have some sort of backup and recovery solution for that data and those applications on your Kubernetes clusters to make sure that you can come back and not have to pay that ransom in the event of a ransomware attack actually happening. I'll also say at this point now that on our YouTube page we have some demos that are specifically simulating an encryption of a ransomware attack and showing how you would go about restoring your data after an encryption does occur. If anyone's interested in that, please feel free to reach out to the Trilio team directly or go find it on the YouTube page. You can also find. And so getting into this then, Trilio covers all three of these bases, especially that last piece as I mentioned before, but there's a lot of steps and a lot of features that we've instituted to cover the identify and protect, detect and mitigate pieces as well. And so here is that alignment that we ended up creating. So in following the NIST cybersecurity framework, essentially our designers and engineers aligned these three categories I just mentioned and listed the bullet points below in terms of features we either currently had or we have roadmapped. And that was a year ago or so that we built out this approach. And so essentially everything you see on here is available today, minus just a few that are coming out with a new release early next year. And so just getting a little bit into the identify and protect piece, you'll see a few components on there that I want to talk about. Application discovery being one of the first ones and most prominent. When you first start using that Trilio management console, you can see all of your applications, all of your namespaces, all of your objects themselves, any granular level you want to get to, you can see on that middle pane, and you can actually have color-coded and highlighted so you can see what is green in terms of protected, what is red in terms of maybe there was a backup that might have failed recently, and then what is not colored at all, what is unfilled, showing that there is no protection of that given object or namespace or application. And so that package management component I mentioned before, that's visualized when you use this tool to really see what is protected and what is not. So an easy first visualization for knowing where your protection exists. Security validations, we have a variety of certifications that I think are important for any backup recovery tool to make sure that you're adhering to the security validations of a given distribution. So Tanzu, Red Hat, IBM, Rancher, just a variety of some that we have certifications with. Backup immutability, you can make backups immutable. Of course, with Trilio, when using an S3 target, to ensure that no one, even someone with admin privileges at your organization, can change a backup file for a given amount of time, essentially ensuring that no matter what sort of breakthrough might happen, that no malicious actor could change the data or delete the data of a backup. Of course, we have RBAC, roles and permissions that you can configure, encryption. One differentiator too I want to mention is Trilio allows you to encrypt your backup plans at the backup plan level. Some other solutions out there would be just encrypting an entire S3 bucket, but with Trilio you can get much more granular than that. So that's one point that I think is important to think about when thinking about backup recovery solutions and looking at what level of encryption you can have and how granular you can get with that encryption. Of course, multi-factor authentication also. Moving into that detect and mitigate piece, abnormal events. This essentially would be some sort of alert for if there's anything abnormal, anything out of the ordinary happening when a backup actually occurs. So an example of this would be when an encryption of data happens, obviously all of the data within that database is changed. And so Trilio is able to see the changes in data that have occurred from one backup to the next. We actually call it incremental backups, and it has a variety of benefits to it. But one of them in the context of ransomware is that since we can see that change in data occurring every time we take a backup, since Trilio can see that change, if one day a massive change occurs, being that all the data was changed and encrypted, Trilio will see that, know that it's outside of a realm of change or delta that it normally sees, and can alert you, the user, to know that there's something odd happening, and you should probably further investigate some of your data and make sure that it's untampered with. Containment would be an example of RBAC containing different roles and permissions. If one role or permission did get compromised, you can immediately shut it down and stop any actions from happening. Malware scanning, we're coming out with an ability to scan those QCOW2 files immediately after the backup occurs to see if there's any malware existing in that backup. And so when you do restore a backup itself, you can have confidence that it was previously scanned and it's immutable and it's encrypted and it's completely untouched. And so you can restore that data with confidence, essentially. And then tying all of those together, notifications and alerts through Slack, email, or Microsoft Teams. That last piece then, the recoverability, which of course, as you can imagine, is where Trilio or any backup solution comes into play in terms of recovering that data so you don't have to pay that ransom. We have some features like deep logging, which essentially keeps track of all the interactions any given role or user has had with a backup to, again, ensure for your own comfort that that backup is safe and untouched. Isolation testing, helping you test backups and data in a testing environment before restoring it to production. We have a disaster recovery planning tool that essentially allows you to immediately, with one click, restore a selected backup from any cluster into a given cluster, your current cluster that you're in. So we designed this backup and recovery tool. So essentially, if you have a primary cluster and then a failover secondary cluster, you would have a backups occurring of that primary cluster, and then on your secondary, your failover cluster, which also has an instance of Trilio, you can go in and say, hey, those primary backups, just in case, let's set up a plan to restore it into my failover immediately in case that ever needs to happen. One day, something happens to your primary cluster, it gets victim of a ransomware attack or something occurs in that secondary cluster, you can then go in immediately, one click, restore your application exactly as it was from the last time that backup was taken. And then lastly, I'll talk about multiple targets. I actually get this question a decent amount as a solutions architect in terms of, can you store one application or one backup into different targets? And the answer is yes. If you are worried about one bucket becoming compromised or one target becoming compromised, you can store your backups in multiple targets to ensure that if an issue happens with one, you have a backup just in case, a backup of your backup essentially. And so with that, that is essentially all of the features that Trilio has in terms of ransomware. I hope this was useful in terms of thinking about backup and recovery and how to recover from any ransomware or malware attacks. I encourage you to look into any backup and recovery solution out there because make sure you do have one, you have something to make sure your data is protected. And of course, also take a look at Trilio as well and some of those ransomware features that we have instituted. And so with that, again, my name is Ben Morrison. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm here with Trilio. If you want to learn more, go ahead and visit trilio.io. You'll be able to watch a demo, test, drive some scenarios, do a free trial if you wish, or you can even get in contact with me, and then we can do a one-on-one demo specifically and talk a little bit more about the details of your environments.